it's amazing to think, just how much information is out there, right? I mean, we're constantly surrounded by it, bombarded even,
Yeah, it certainly is.
but I think, the real skill, maybe even the art of it all, is taking what's already there and like
Seeing it.
seeing it in a new way, finding those hidden connections. And that's what we're going to try to do today.
Exactly.
And today, you, our listener, you've given us a really interesting place to start.
Yeah.
You shared these excerpts from your January Dynaxioms, and
Oh.
it's kind of amazing. These are like your own personal observations, thoughts, going all the way back to 2001
Etche?
up to 2024. It's quite a span of time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting because these Dynaxioms, they touch on, well, everything really.
It's true.
Tech, art, society, even just like what it means to be human.
Absolutely. It's like a cross-section of, how you've seen the world change and evolve.
And I think what's really exciting for me, I mean, looking at all these pieces together, we have this chance to see how those early ideas have like developed, right?
Right.
Which of your predictions, maybe actually came true?
Yeah.
And, what are those core ideas that just kind of keep popping up?
The things that stay with you.
Yeah.
And I think the fun part here, the exciting part of this deep dive, is connecting these seemingly different points and maybe uncovering something more profound within them.
I like that. So let's jump right in.
Okay.
And I thought, why don't we start with technology?
Great.
So back in 2001, you mentioned how clunky computers were back then. Just the sheer amount of waiting involved. And it's funny because then in 2017, you've got this note about network latency still being a drag.
Right.
It's kind of like, we've come so far, but some things never really change, do they?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because it's like, even as technology progresses, it doesn't necessarily eliminate all friction. You know what I mean?
Totally.
It's just the nature of those frustrations kind of, they shift.
Like the problems evolve,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like our expectations change and then we find new bottlenecks.
But we're still waiting.
Yeah, there's always something, always some kind of lag, something that holds us back a little bit.
It's true. And then in 2006, you had this really fascinating idea.
Oh, yeah.
About cell phone cinema, and you called it exformed movies.
Right.
Like this idea that we'd naturally gravitate towards these shorter, more condensed experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so much is like understood, but not really stated directly. It's like exformation, not information.
Right.
And it's so interesting to think about that now because, well, look at how we consume content on our phones. It's all those quick videos, those memes, those jokes that you get instantly if you're, in the know.
If you're part of that shared understanding.
Exactly.
It's like we're relying more and more on that unspoken context, that shared cultural background.
Yeah, absolutely. And, thinking about how we communicate in general, I mean, it's all about efficiency now, right? Like shorter attention spans, everything needs to be immediate, and it all makes sense within that specific context.
And I think that trend, it's only going to accelerate.
Totally. And, this is where it gets really interesting for me.
Oh, yeah.
So in 2016, you said that, quote, the singularity has already happened in music.
Mm-hmm.
In your reasoning. Because synthesizers are everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a thought that just kind of sneaks up on you.
It does, doesn't it?
Because it makes you realize that these huge, almost unimaginable changes can happen so slowly that we barely even register them.
It's like we're so focused on looking for this big dramatic event, this singularity, that we miss the quieter shifts that are actually reshaping everything.
It's the frog in the boiling water.
Exactly.
And I think, the synthesizers and music thing, that's such a perfect example. Like, think about...
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's in every genre now. I mean, that's a revolution that's already happened.
And it's become normal. We don't even think about it anymore.
Right. And speaking of things that have become normal, that are just kind of woven into our lives.
Right.
In 2017, you had this observation about Facebook and how it's mediating so much of how we interact. And you even mentioned hoping for more competition, to shake things up a bit. Now, looking back from where we are now, what do you think? Like, has social media really changed that much?
Well, I mean, sure, there have been some new players, and the way people use social media has definitely evolved. But I think the fundamental role of these big platforms, the dominant ones, they're still incredibly powerful. I think maybe the conversation has shifted more towards, like, the implications of this mediation. You know what I mean?
Rather than like a complete overhaul.
Right, exactly.
And then there's this line from 2018, and I love it because it's so darkly funny.
Uh-huh. What is it?
You said, at this point, anyone can have an idea for a Black Mirror episode.
Oh, that's so true.
It's like, it's become a joke.
Yeah.
But it's true, right? It's like our awareness of just how strange technology can be, how it can go wrong. It's everywhere now.
It's almost like it's become this cultural lens, right? Like, we process and anticipate the downsides of technology through these Black Mirror scenarios.
Like, we're all kind of prepped for the dystopia now.
Yeah, and I think it shows how we're both fascinated and kind of anxious about where all this is heading.
And that brings us to another really provocative thought.
Yeah.
It's from 2019, and you said that our fascination with robots actually comes from our own nature, and that the real singularity, it might not be about robots getting smarter.
Right.
It might be about humans getting, well...
dumber.
Yeah, basically. Like, once both robots and humans can pass a Turing test.
I love that. It completely flips the script on how we usually think about AI.
It does, isn't it? It's like we're so focused on the machines, but what if the bigger change is happening to us?
Right. And I think it makes us consider, how humans and AI might actually be shaping each other.
Like a two-way street.
Exactly.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about art, aesthetics, creativity, all that good stuff.
Sounds good.
So back in 2001, you mentioned this concept of collision architecture.
Uh-huh.
And basically, it's art that rejects these traditional ideas of beauty, It embraces the accidental, the kind of jarring elements.
And it makes you think about all the different art movements that have, intentionally challenged our ideas of what's beautiful.
Yeah, totally. It's like it's a constant push and pull, right? Like artists pushing boundaries and then the rest of us trying to catch up.
Exactly. It's like with collision architecture, it's that deliberate disruption of expectations. And it forces us to, like, reconsider what we even think art is.
Like, it's a challenge. And then in that same year, you asked a really interesting question.
What's that?
It was about the long-term viability of installed art, like art that needs to be assembled, that's specific to a certain environment.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how we value something that isn't necessarily meant to last.
Right. It's like, how do you preserve something that's ephemeral?
It really touches on that tension between, the tangible object and the concept behind it.
And I think a lot of installed art, it really prioritizes the experience, like the impact it has in that moment, in that space.
Right.
And then in 2004, you made this really, I think, important observation about how software has maybe given people this idea that conceptual art is somehow easier to create.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when you compare it to, like traditional craft where there's so much skill and time involved.
Yeah, there's a certain level of craft that often gets overlooked.
Right. It makes you wonder if we've lost sight of the value of that, that hard-won expertise.
I think it's a really important point, especially as creative tools become more accessible.
Because it's not just about the tools.
No, it's about the thought, the intention, the years of practice that go into creating something truly meaningful.
It's true. And fast forwarding to 2014, you made this prediction that those big data visualizations we see in museums, the really flashy ones,
right?
You said they might be quickly forgotten.
Yeah.
And you linked it to this idea that understanding abstract art, any kind of abstraction, it requires you to engage with it repeatedly.
It's not just about that initial wow factor.
Right. Like sometimes you need to sit with something for a while to really let it sink in.
Absolutely. And I think even when information is presented in a visually appealing way, it doesn't automatically mean we understand it or connect with it as a deeper level.
And then there's this classic observation from 2005.
Okay.
You said that the public often prefers innovation dressed up as imitation.
I like that.
And you used David Bowie as an example.
Perfect example.
And I think it really highlights why truly new ideas, like really groundbreaking stuff, it can face so much resistance.
Yeah, because people are comfortable with what they know.
It's like there's a safety in the familiar.
Right.
And so even when something is presented as new, it's easier to accept it if it has those familiar elements.
Exactly. And Bowie, I mean, his whole career was about pushing boundaries. But he always did it in a way that was, well, it was still accessible.
Yes, it's like he gave people just enough of what they knew to make them comfortable with the new stuff.
That's a real skill.
Okay, so let's move on to something a little different.
Right.
Society, culture, beliefs, all the big stuff.
All right.
So back in 2002, you wrote that the existence of a physical God is moot, but a guiding spiritual principle, that's what really matters. And it makes you think about how we define spirituality, like it doesn't have to be tied to a specific religion.
I think it speaks to this human need for meaning, for purpose.
Like a connection to something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. And it might not be about dogma or specific beliefs.
It's more about like a moral compass.
Right, a set of values.
And then you've got these really interesting thoughts on the American dream.
Okay.
So in 2003, you said that it's built on ambition and innovation, but then paradoxically, those who conform might find more success.
It's a strange tension, isn't it?
It is. And then in 2025, you called the American dream a brand.
Yeah.
Like anyone can create their own version of it.
It's true. I think it highlights how these big societal ideas, they're constantly changing.
And it makes you think, for you listening, how has your understanding of the American dream changed over the years?
Has it become more personal?
Yeah, and does this idea of it being a brand, does that resonate with you?
I think it's an interesting way to think about it.
And then there were these contrasting views in 2007 about the execution of Saddam Hussein.
Right.
Some people saw it as justice, while others saw it as justice by revenge.
And it's a powerful reminder that different cultures, they have very different ideas about justice.
It's like what's right in one culture can be completely wrong in another.
And I think it's so important to remember that, to have that cultural relativism when we're trying to understand global events.
Because there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
No, not when it comes to morality or justice.
Okay, this next one I think is really fascinating.
Okay.
So in 2015, you talked about voodoo, and you said it could be seen as an attempt to reconcile forced religious conversion.
Yeah.
And you linked that to migration and how it often leads to these cultural matchups.
Right.
And then you mentioned the Charlie Hebdo attacks as this tragic example of opposition to that kind of cultural blending.
It's a really complex issue.
It is. And I think what's so important to understand is that on the one hand, you have this potential for cultural exchange to be really enriching.
Right. It can drive progress.
But on the other hand, it can also create friction, even violence.
Yeah, because there's that deep desire to preserve one's culture.
And sometimes that clashes with the inevitable changes that happen when cultures mix.
It's a delicate balance.
And then we have this prediction from 2007 about Barack Obama shaping cybergenic media. And then in 2025, you noted that it was actually Trump who defined a more hyperegoic style on social media.
It's fascinating to see how different leaders have used these platforms.
Right, and how have been shaped by them.
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
And I think it highlights that connection between leadership and the media.
Like how they influence each other.
Exactly. Okay, this next one is a bit more serious.
Okay.
In 2013, you talked about a global equalizer, and you said it's often a natural catastrophe. And then you connected climate change to a death by millions of tiny cuts,
right,
like these gradual layers of injury and scar tissue on the environment.
It's a powerful way to think about the long-term impact.
It is, because it's not always about these big dramatic events.
No, it's the slow, persistent changes that are often the most damaging.
And then in 2016, there's this really personal reflection.
Oh, yeah.
You said that your main concern should be whether your own choices resonate with the government, with how society is run.
It's about personal responsibility.
And it's also about being aware of your place within those larger systems,
Like, how do your actors, your choices, align with the bigger picture?
Yeah, it's a good question to ask ourselves.
I think so.
Now, here's a bit of a contrasting pair of thoughts about societal upheaval.
Okay.
So in 2021, you wrote, "In revolutions, wisdom never prevails." But then in 2025, you added this distinction between revolts and revolutions.
Right.
Saying that revolts, they can actually learn from past experiences.
Yeah, it's about the application of knowledge, right?
And I think the key difference is that revolutions, they tend to completely break from the past.
Yeah, it's a clean slate, but maybe they throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. Whereas revolts, they might be more focused, more strategic, and more likely to actually learn from history.
And to use that knowledge to create meaningful change.
And then there's this line from 2023 that's just so direct.
What is it?
You said, "Perhaps it's a bad thing to give humans a platform."
Oh, wow.
And I think in this age where everyone can broadcast their thoughts to the world,
Yeah.
it's a question we really need to consider. Like, what are the downsides of giving everyone that megaphone?
I think it challenges the idea that more voice is always better.
Right. Like, what about the responsibility that comes with that platform?
Exactly.
Okay, last section.
Okay.
Human experience and time.
All right.
So in 2016, you offered this advice. During an existential crisis, taking any kind of action is better than doing nothing.
It's about taking control, right?
And I think it reminds us that we have agency, even when things feel really overwhelming.
Because that inaction, it can be paralyzing.
And even a small step can sometimes create momentum, it can give you a sense of direction.
Absolutely.
Now, in 2017, you talked about the contrast between the early internet, that one world feeling, and what it's become now.
Yeah.
And you linked it to the shift from early television to the more fragmented world of social media.
Right.
Like how we've gone from sharing and liking to, well, not really collaborating or having those deep conversations.
It's almost a loss of innocence, isn't it?
It is a bit. And in that same year, you said that TV is now a mature medium while the internet is still future.
That's interesting.
And a future, you said, filled with cautionary tales.
I like that. It's like TV, we kind of know what it is now.
Right.
But the internet, it's still evolving, and there's a lot of potential for things to go wrong.
And then this prediction from 2019, it's a bit melancholy, but you said that movies from 2019 probably won't have the same nostalgic power in 80 years as, say, films from the 1940s.
I wonder why that is.
I think it's because nostalgia, it's often tied to these really formative experiences, And maybe 2019 just, maybe it just doesn't have that same kind of cultural weight as some of those earlier eras.
It makes you wonder what it is about certain times and places that make them so nostalgic.
It does. And then there's this observation also from 2019.
Yeah.
You said that when we're looking for answers, we tend to see the world through the lens of whatever we're reading at the time.
It's true, isn't it?
Like our current reading list, it shapes how we understand everything.
And we're borrowing those frameworks, those perspectives.
And it's a good reminder to be aware of those influences.
Absolutely. Because we might not even realize how they're shaping our thinking.
And then in 2020, you had this thought about reset points in life.
Right.
You said that what's often needed is faith. Like linking resolutions to a belief in our own ability to follow through.
It's like, it's not just about making the plan, it's about having that underlying confidence that you can actually do it.
And then this lovely, simple thought from 2021. Even just a little bit of music can be healing.
It's true. It's amazing how music can affect us so deeply.
And then in 2022, you captured the feeling of information overload perfectly.
How so?
You said you can't watch anything, but you have to watch everything.
Oh, yeah, that's the paradox of the internet age.
It's like there's so much out there, we feel like we need to consume it all.
And we end up feeling overwhelmed and constantly behind.
And in that same year, you offered this really big picture perspective. You said that the end of the world has already happened multiple times in Earth's history.
Right.
And it will happen again.
It's a humbling thought.
It is. It kind of puts our own worries into perspective.
And it reminds us that change is constant, even on a planetary scale.
And then this really poignant thought from 2024. We think we know each other by heart, but the mind is in the way.
That's deep.
It is, because it's about those barriers we create, even in our closest relationship.
Yeah, like even when we think we understand someone completely, there's always more going on beneath the surface.
And maybe our own minds are the biggest obstacle to truly connecting with others.
It's a powerful thought.
It is. And finally, this insight from 2017. The best ideas often come within the first 15 minutes of starting a creative project.
I like that.
It's like you find that wavelength, you catch the big fish early on.
Yeah, it's about trusting that initial burst of inspiration.
And it's encouraging because it means that sometimes the hardest part is just starting.
Just getting over that initial hump.
Wow, what a journey through your January Dynaxioms.
It's been fun.
It has, from those clunky computers to the depths of the human mind.
It's amazing to see how all these different observations, they connect, they inform each other.
And I think that's the real value of this deep dive.
Right. It's about extracting those nuggets of wisdom and seeing how they fit together.
And then maybe looking at the world in a new way.
Exactly.
So for you, our listener, I'll leave you with this. After looking back at all this technological progress, all these changes, do you think we're any closer to truly understanding ourselves, understanding each other?
It's a good question.
It is. And which of these Dynaxioms resonated with you the most? Which one got you thinking? Keep mulling those over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.